I'm delighted to be back at the Art Students League. I have very, very special feelings for the League. I went to school here in 1954 as a roughly a student at about 19 years of age, and I'm always nostalgic when I come back. This is a great, great place, as I'm sure you all know. Erroneously, it was reported that I was going to give a pastel demonstration. Instead, it's going to be in oil. Oh, good. I'm glad that you're not disappointed. For those of you that have not seen a demonstration before, I'd like to mention at the beginning that if there are any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to ask them. If they're not too time-consuming or difficult to answer, I'll try to do my best to answer them. For those of you that are in my class and are working in pastel, I'd like to mention that the procedures that I'll be demonstrating this evening are identical procedures in pastel. The only difference is in the medium. Now, normally, when I left school and on occasion was asked to teach, the way in which I determined it would be best to teach was to mention all the things that were not mentioned to me that I had to try to figure out, things that were very simplified, I later came to find out. Consequently, what I'm going to do in this demonstration is get into a lot of things in regard to the materials that I'm going to be using. I'm sure that some of this is going to be utterly fundamental for many of you, but in an effort to make sure that everything is covered, I want to cover as much as I can. To begin with, I want to show you the palette that I'll be using. And there are some things that I believe to be significant about this palette. Number one, this is an extra large sized palette. I had a carpenter take a piece of plywood and to cut it in the traditional shape of a palette, but to make it much larger in order that it would accommodate some of the many skin tone mixtures that I pre-mix before doing a portrait or figure painting segment. This has an opening for one's thumb, one's hand, and one's arm, but it's really too heavy to hold, and I prefer to have a palette flat on the table. Additionally, this is a middle tone palette. Personally, I do not favor working on white palettes. When one works on white, I believe that the disadvantage is that every color shows up as being darker than white. And when you put light colors on a white palette, they look dark. When you put them on your painting, they often have a different relationship. When one mixes on a middle tone palette, however, the virtue is that the light colors contrast to the middle tone palette and look light right away. The dark colors contrast to the palette and look dark. And that's much more the relationship that they have on your painting. Now, additionally, the color of the palette, I have made a deliberately neutral greenish gray kind of color. And it's a cool color. And when one paints portraits, there are a lot of warm skin tones that are often used, and they stand out in great contrast to the cool colored neutral palette. When you tone your palette with a particular color, I would strongly recommend that it not be bright red. Everything mixed on red will look very cool in comparison. Nor would I recommend the opposite, a bluish palette. Everything mixed on a bluish palette brings out the warmth of the colors. So what one wants is something that's in between, and generally a cool color. Now, after obtaining the wooden palette, I bought acrylic paints, a warm color and a cool color, a red and a green, in order to make this color on my palette. And I covered the palette with the acrylic tone. After it was dry, I then covered the palette with polyurethane varnish in order to seal it and make it non-absorbent. Now, if you work on a wooden palette that has not been sealed, your palette may be very absorbent and it might drain the oil from your paint. And any painting that you do upon a palette that's very absorbent is going to give you very stiff, dry paint. Now, apparently, many of the old masters centuries ago would coat their wooden palettes with linseed oil and soak them for 2 or 3 weeks in order to make them non-absorbent. But with modern polyurethane varnishes, You can seal the palette and have it dry within about 45 minutes. Now, the colors on the periphery of my palette are in a particular order, but I don't think it makes really very much difference at all what order you select. What makes a great deal of difference, however, is whatever sequence you choose, I would strongly recommend that you keep putting your paints out in exactly the same order every time you paint, so that when you're painting, you don't have to break your concentration and stop and hunt for where you put the color that day. You'll know that your colors are in a certain area every time you look at your palette. I always compare the position of the colors on the palette to keys on the piano. After one has learned the placement of the keys, it just becomes automatic. Now, the first color is white, and white is perhaps the most important color to choose in your palette. White controls the drying time of your paint, and it controls the viscosity, the workability of your paint. There are fundamentally two whites from which to choose, and there are basically two techniques in all of oil painting. There are whites that dry quickly, and there are whites that dry slowly. And dependent upon which white you select, you will either accelerate the drying of your paint or you will retard the drying of your paint. Now, if you want to do paintings and want to keep the paint wet for long periods of time so that one can do a great deal of wet into wet painting and a great deal of blending, then I would select a slow drying white. And the slowest drying white is zinc white. Now, that is the technique of a painter like Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci endeavored to keep his paint wet for long periods of time, so he chose slow drying pigments. And had it been available in his day, he would surely have chosen zinc white. In the work of Da Vinci, there is no evidence of any brushstroke. Everything is fused together by virtue of his having kept the paint wet for long periods of time. I am using and advocating the opposite technique. I want the paint to dry quickly. And the reason I want the paint to dry quickly is so that the brush strokes will set in place and be very evident in the finished painting. Now, that is the technique of artists like Rembrandt, Velázquez, Sargent, Frans Hals, where one sees evidence of the brush strokes. In that technique, you want your paint to dry quickly. The fastest drying white is flake white, and it is flake white that I'm recommending. Now, for those of you that have not used flake white before, flake white can be particularly stiff and a little bit difficult to manipulate, especially in cold weather. When your paints are cold, they're stiffer and a little bit less runny. If you should find that flake white is a little too stiff for your purposes, on occasion, it might be a good idea to add approximately a fourth of another white to your flake white to make it a little bit more malleable. And the other whites that I would add to it could be either zinc or titanium or permalba. Now, the next color is ivory black. Then I have Prussian blue. For those of you that have not used Prussian blue, let me tell you that Prussian blue is an extremely intense color. It takes very little Prussian blue to cover everything in sight. If you find Prussian blue not entirely to your liking, the next blue that I would recommend would be ultramarine blue, but I prefer the Prussian blue. The next color is raw sienna. Then I have yellow ochre, then Naples yellow, cadmium yellow medium, and I am emphasizing the word medium. Cadmium yellow medium. Then I have cadmium red light, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, raw umber, burnt umber, sap green, and phthalo green. This is a group of colors I use for every painting that I do, be it a portrait, a figure, a still life, a landscape, or a seascape. This is called a restricted palette, and any group of, say, 14 or fewer colors is considered a limited or restricted palette. If you have many more colors than this, I would give some thought to considering eliminating colors that aren't necessary. Now, many years ago, when I eliminated too many colors that I'd bought at the art store and reduced it to only those that I felt that were essential, I very quickly learned how to mix colors and how to harmonize colors. Occasionally, I add another color or two to my palette in order to match some unusually bright note that I may encounter. Once in a while, I add ultramarine blue. Occasionally, I might add another zinc yellow or yellow light. But rarely do I have to add another color. Now, the colors on the inside of my palette pertain to painting portraits and skin tones. Like most artists years ago, I did not pre-mix this group of colors, but I would simply mix from the border of my palette all of the colors that I needed as I painted. But when one is doing portraits, there's a special circumstance. You have someone posing for you, and there is a time limit. And I always felt that my sitter was watching the clock, ready to bolt the studio as soon as their ordeal was finished. So I found myself rushing the painting process in order to get as much done as I could before I lost my sitter. And I felt that I wasn't always taking the time to mix exactly the colors that I needed. Therefore, at a certain point, it made sense to me to spend some 10 or 15 minutes before the portrait sitting mixing a group of colors I was likely to encounter. And I have done that. And these mixtures are, first, a combination of raw sienna and cadmium red and white mixed together, to which I have then added white, so that it is now in a series of gradations of value from shade to tint. Now, it's the first time tonight that I've used the word value. The word value, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, means the light and dark quality of colors. The second color is simply yellow ochre, to which I have added white. Then I have another mixture, yellow ochre and burnt sienna, mixed together, making what I refer to as a gold or ochre color. And I have added white to make that into increments of gradations of value. Then I have taken burnt sienna and added white to it. Here I've taken raw umber and added white. And here is another mixture, again with raw sienna, but this time with black. That makes a cool color, to which I have added white. These two are cool colors. These are warm colors. In this range, I have mixed together a very dark green, sap green, and a very dark red, alizarin crimson, which when combined make the darkest brown it is my experience can be mixed. And in this direction, I have the same components, alizarin crimson and sap green, but I have a much larger proportion of alizarin crimson, only a little bit of sap green. And I lighten this mixture not with white, but with cadmium yellow medium. That produces a very strong reddish-brown rust color, which is especially useful in painting portraits for warm shadows and skin tones. There are other uses, obviously, to which it can also be put. In this direction, the same components are used again, sap green and alizarin crimson, but this time I have a much larger proportion of sap green, a lesser amount of alizarin crimson. This is again lightened with cadmium yellow medium, producing the complementary, which is a greenish brown, which often can be used for cool shadows on skin tones. In this range are four colors that were favored by the 17th century Dutch masters. These colors are all raw umber. The first one is raw umber that I have lightened slightly by the addition of yellow ochre. The second is raw umber that I have lightened a little bit more by the addition of more yellow ochre. The next two are also raw umber and yellow ochre, but I have made them warmer by the addition of burnt sienna. These are cool colors, these are warm colors. This is a cool color, this is a warm color. These colors are all lightened with white. These colors are lightened with cadmium yellow. These colors are lightened with yellow ochre. If I see these colors on the model, I use them. If I don't see them or I see other colors, I mix them from the border of my palette. Now, tonight I'm going to be demonstrating how to use this palette. The day after tomorrow, I'm going to be having a color demonstration in class, and I'll be describing how this palette evolved and how it relates to palettes of past painters in art history. That has to do with the palette. The next thing I want to mention has to do with the brushes. And there are fundamentally two kinds of brushes that painters use. This is a bristle brush. And a bristle brush is characterized by being somewhat blonde in color. Bristle brushes hold a lot of paint, withstand a lot of rough treatment. There are many, many painters in oil who use bristle brushes exclusively. But there is another kind of brush with which I'm sure you're all familiar. This is a sable brush, and a sable brush is characterized by being much softer in feel, redder in color. Sable brushes are generally used for delicate blending and details. Many artists, myself included, use both bristle and sable brushes, but I know of no artists that paint in oil that use only sable brushes. Usually it's a combination of the two. Now, within those two types of brushes, there are a number of different shapes and a number of different sizes. This is a bristle brush that has a short length to the hair and a chisel edge, a straight chisel edge. This is called a bright. And the stroke that's made with this brush will give you a chisel sharp edged. This is not a brush I particularly recommend or use. This is a variation of the bristle chisel edge brush, the flat brush. This is called a flat, and it has a greater length to the hair, also a straight edge. It's not a brush that I find that useful. This is a round bristle brush. This is the kind of brush that was most often used by the old masters. They didn't have all the shapes and sizes we have today, but I don't recommend the round brush particularly either. What I do recommend is this brush, and this is called a filbert, F-I-L-B-E-R-T. A filbert combines the length of the flat brush and the round brush. It's tapered to a bit of a point like the round brush. And the filbert is an extremely useful tool. That is the shape that your brushes take when they become worn down. They wear down to a bit of a point. But the manufacturer can select hairs that naturally curl inward to make the excellent filbert brush. Now, one other kind of brush is referred to as a fan brush. And a fan brush has traditionally been used by painters to blend one wet color into another. I'll be using it for a different purpose this evening, and when I do, I'll mention another way in which it's being used. Amongst the sable brushes, they have the same configurations. They have the brights, the flats, they have the filberts, they have round brushes, and they have fan brushes. Now, when one buys brushes, when you buy sable brushes, I would recommend that you buy the brights. And I would suggest as well that you buy numbers 1 through 9. When one obtains the filbert brush, I would recommend that you have sizes 1 through 12. Now, I have all those sizes, but in addition, I have 4 or 5 brushes of every size. And the reason I have so many brushes is in order always to be able to find a brush of the right size, the right shape, that has the right feel and is clean when I am able to use it. Now, when one does a lot of painting, the character of your brushes change from week to week or from painting to painting. And when I pick up a brush, I test it on my palette or even on my canvas, and if it doesn't have just the right feel, and I can't tell you what that is, a certain degree of spring or resistance, then I immediately eliminate it and pick up another one of the same size and shape. At the beginning of a painting, my own experience is that I use very few brushes, but towards the end of the painting, when one wants particularly clean, concise, finished strokes, I find myself using a great many brushes. So I want to make sure that the ones that I'm seeking are clean, so I'm not held up by not having the right brush. Now, that has to do with the brushes. In this jar is a material that is referred to as a medium. And a medium is generally a combination of various oils, often turpentine, and occasionally varnish. The primary purpose of a liquid medium is to add some of the medium to your stiff paint to make your paint a little thinner and easier to manipulate and flow. However, dependent upon the ingredients of your medium, you can impart different qualities to your paint. There are some combinations that make up mediums that will accelerate the drying of your paint. Some mediums will slow up the drying of your paint. Some mediums will add gloss to your paint. Some mediums will make your paint dry matte. Some mediums will make it easier to blend your paint. Other mediums will make it easier to obtain fine lines and sharp details. Now, over the centuries, artists have never agreed as to what constitutes the ideal medium. It depends entirely upon how you wish to paint. Now, one doesn't have to use medium at all, but if you do use medium, I would recommend to start with a very simple medium. And this particular medium is a simple medium. This is 2 parts turpentine and 1 part stand oil. Stand oil is a refined form of linseed oil. This medium accelerates the drying of your paint. It adds a slight gloss to your paint. And it imparts a feeling of drag or resistance to your brush stroke. Now, in this can is turpentine. Turpentine is the solvent for cleaning paint from your brushes. There are 2 kinds of turpentine. There is artist's quality turpentine, which you buy in an art store. And that is called highly refined, rectified gum turpentine. That is especially useful for making mediums, having a very fine grade turpentine. But for cleaning your brushes, I do not recommend that you buy expensive artist quality turpentine. Instead, go to a paint store or a hardware store and buy quart or gallons of either gum turpentine or steam distilled turpentine or a turpentine substitute. The very best turpentine substitute is mineral spirits. And you can use mineral spirits for making mediums if you don't want to use turpentine. You can use mineral spirits for cleaning your brushes. However, I do not recommend that you use a turpentine substitute other than mineral spirits for making mediums, because the turpentine substitutes will not interact chemically in the same way as will mineral spirits or turpentine. Now, that has to do with the materials on my table. The last element I want to mention has to do with the canvas. This is a 24 by 20 inch canvas. This is a pre-stretched acrylic primed canvas. The only time that I use pre-stretched canvases is for giving demonstrations. I give a few during the year, and I simply don't want to take the time to stretch all those canvases. For all other work that I do, I generally buy rolls of canvas, always linen. Linen is a better product than cotton, but there's nothing wrong with cotton. I buy rolls of linen, I buy heavy-duty stretcher bars, and I always stretch my own canvases. Not only is it more economical to buy rolls of canvas and stretcher bars and do it yourself, but you often end up with a better product than they mass produce in the factories. Now, this is an acrylic primed canvas. There are oil primed canvases and acrylic primed canvases. And in class, in a couple of days, I'll be talking about the differences between those ways of making canvas. The elements that I mentioned, this being an acrylic primed canvas, a cotton canvas, pre-stretched canvas, none of those things are yet the most important aspect of this canvas. I believe the most important item has to do with the weave of the canvas. And there are 3 types of weave from which you can select your canvas. You can use a fine weave canvas, a medium weave canvas, or a rough weave canvas. And then to make it a bit more complicated, there are single primed canvases that have 1 coat on them, and there are double primed canvases. And I'll talk again about that later in the week. Depending upon the kind of work that you want to do, it's important to select the texture of your canvas that will give you the results that you want. If you want to do work that has a lot of detail and a great deal of subtlety, such as painting portraits, then one would select a fine weave canvas. The natural character of your brush stroke on a fine weave canvas will be sharp. If you want to do paintings that have a lot of thick paint and a lot of rough characteristics, then I would recommend to you that you use a rough weave canvas. The natural character of your brush stroke on a rough weave canvas will be broken and splattered and grainy, and you will become an instant automatic impressionist when you work on a rough weave canvas. What I am working on is a medium weave canvas. On a medium weave canvas, one can obtain both rough, thick, impressionistic characteristics, and you can also get fine, sharp, subtle details. Now, I have set the easel up so that it is straight up and down. In fact, even leaning forward just a little bit. I have the canvas parallel to my model. And I have the canvas at the middle of it at my eye level or slightly above. All of that is very deliberate. To begin with, when one paints in oil, there are immediately considerations of glare and reflection on the wet paint on your painting. And one of the ways of minimizing the glare is to have your canvas straight up and down, vertical. If glare persists, as you progressively tilt the top of your canvas forward, you will minimize the glare. If you work on a tripod easel leaning backwards, you will have a maximum glare and reflection. So your easel ought to be straight up and down with the ability to be able to tilt the top forward slightly. I have the canvas parallel to my model, so I can look at my model and simply shift my eyes left and right to see the image that I'm painting. I have my table between myself and the model so that I can look at the model and back and forth to my table. I'm setting up ideal conditions for myself. Painting out of the left-hand side of my canvas with the table in close proximity to the model. But as a painter, you really need to train yourself, if you've not already done so, to be able to paint under less than ideal conditions. You have to know how to paint out of the right-hand side of your canvas as well as the left. You need to know how to paint when your subject is there, and you've got to put all your equipment over to the right. Additionally, apropos of glare and reflection, if you're doing a painting that has a particularly dark background, the background may act like a mirror, and it may reflect your own clothing. So should that happen, I would recommend you wear dark clothing when you're painting, so you're not reflecting your own clothing into the painting. Those are the things I was going to mention. I have 3 spotlights, and these spotlights have a special 150-watt bulb, which is a balance of blue and yellow light, and it simulates, to a certain extent, north light. The only painting that I do under artificial light are demonstrations. Everything else I do in my studio under a north skylight. In any event, with a north skylight, you have the need for only one window, which illuminates the easel, your taboret or your table, and your canvas. Here I have to have a separate light on each element, but it is the same light. Now, those are the things I was going to mention. I have a question, and that is there anyone who would like to volunteer to be the subject of the demonstration? Let's see. I saw your hand first. Ray? Okay, Ray. while Ray is working his way up here, does anyone have any question? Yes?
I have a question about the flake white. Have you ever painted with the flake white substitute?
I'm starting to, because it's becoming increasingly difficult to get flake white.
And you agree with it?
So far, I've tested a few of them, and it has a slightly different consistency, but the main thing is that the paint dry the next day. So I think it's probably here to stay, and they're working on making something that's very close. Yes?
I wondered if you could talk a bit about keeping the turpentine clean as you paint. How important or unimportant is that?
Well, ideally, you might as well use clean turpentine. I don't always ascribe to that, but I have a container that has a screen in the bottom. And generally, the turpentine, the dirty part, will settle to the bottom, and so my turpentine is relatively clean. But I'm not a stickler on that being especially clean. After 5, 6 days or a week, however long I've kept it, periodically I change it. I don't paint with straight turpentine. I just clean. Yes. Well, I don't know what you mean by all the equipment. Pardon? No, it would dry too quickly. I wouldn't pre-mix colors in acrylic because they dry very quickly. There are retarders that you can use in the acrylic paint that'll slow up the drying, but I don't have a lot of experience with acrylic paint. I switched to alkyd paint when I wanted paint that dried even more quickly than oil paint, and then it's the same thing as this.
What I usually do is mix the paint on the canvas with acrylic. It's a whole different procedure.
Well, I really don't have a lot of experience or a lot of success in doing acrylic, so I can't really answer that. I'm just going to take a couple more questions and get started. Yes?
For pastel, do you also have everything in the same place, and do you choose pastel colors that fit with this?
No, I don't. Tomorrow in class and each day in class, we're going to be showing some videos, instructional videos that I made, and I have several that I've made on pastel. I don't know if you're in class, but if you are, they'll be shown at lunchtime. In pastel, I don't limit the palette. Here I limit the palette to 14 colors, and then I mix whatever I need. In pastel, I have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of colors. And I have it arranged in a way in which I can find what I need, but there it's the opposite. I have as many colors as I can acquire in order to be able to find exactly the colors that I need. I can't get into all that about pastel right now. Yes?
What kind of color do you suggest? Starting gambling, Winsor Newton, Mary?
Well, I understand. There are many marvelous paint manufacturers. There are lots of very good paints from which to choose. For a long time, starting when I came here to the League 50 years ago, I began using Grumbacher paint, and I still use Grumbacher paint. Some colors I find are perfectly good in Winsor Newton. That's an excellent brand. I haven't used them. There are a lot of very good brands of paint that I just simply haven't used. Unlike pastel, I recommend that one use one brand of paint, maybe two at the most, but don't keep changing brands of paint, because the name of the color in one brand is may be the same in another brand, but the color itself may be completely different. And it's like inventing the wheel every time you paint. You have to figure out how a particular brand's paint works as opposed to something you're familiar with. In pastel, I have as many pastels of every brand as I can get. In oil paint, I limit it as much as possible. I'm going to do the demonstration. Your first name is?
Raymond.
Raymond, okay. Okay. Okay, you can relax a second. What I normally do in starting a portrait is to look at my subject's face first. And I have my subject turned to a front view. And I observe their face in a front view. I have sort of a system for observing the model. To begin with, I know ahead of time whether it's going to be in pastel or in oil. I know ahead of time if it's going to be a head and shoulder portrait, a half figure, a three-quarter figure, or a full length. But regardless of the amount of the figure or the medium, I start by looking at a front view of the model. And I simply observe their features, their mouth, the eyes, the pattern of shadow on their face, and the contour that their head makes against the background. Then I ask my model to turn in very small increments and stop, turn their head and stop, slightly to their right. Yeah, it would be to the right. And I observe how the features have become more prominent or less prominent, how the patterns of shadow and light have changed, how the contour, the outline that the model makes against the background, has changed. I have the model continue to turn in very small increments, and I continue to observe whether or not the features are becoming more pronounced or less pronounced, how the patterns of shadow and light appear, less interesting, more expressive, less expressive, how the contour is changing. Is it more varied? Is it too symmetrical? Is it less or more interesting? I have the model turn all the way to a profile, and I simply observe. Then I have the model come back to a front view. At that point, I might decide to change the lighting, and there are numerous ways the lighting can be changed, given that we're dealing with artificial light. If I raise the height of the spotlight, the length of the shadows on the model will be longer. And again, I might go from a front view in small increments to a profile, observing how the change in the height of the light has affected the features, the light and shade pattern, and the contour. If I lower the light, the length of the shadows will be shorter. If I move the spotlight further back, there will be more shadow on the model's face and less light. If I move the spotlight to the front, there will be more light and less shade. I can double all those choices by having the model turn to his left, turn his head to his left, shows me the other side of the face. All those choices can be doubled again by taking the spotlight and literally putting it on the other side of the model. So the direction of the light will be different. Now, there are a lot of variables, and I generally take the time to do all this. I have said nothing yet about the clothing, the choice of background, posing the hands, the furniture, and numerous additional compositional elements that will come up tomorrow in class. In class, we have 6 models posing for us, 3 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. And I will take the time to explain how I recommend going about selecting all the other components that make up the pose. What I'm going to do now, however, is very quickly pick a pose and start the demonstration. I've already positioned the light so that at the moment, the pattern of shadow, your first name is again? Raymond, Ray. It's already fascinating. It's already very interesting. Raymond has a great head, very strong coloring. The position of the light right now is already good. The only thing I would have preferred is that he had a lower hairline, because it's, would you? Well, we're alike in that. It's harder to do someone when there's little in between the eyebrows and the top of the head, but we'll deal with that. What I'm going to do is just very slightly have you just turn your head a little to your left. Hold it. Okay, hold it like that. Down a little on your chin. Hold it. Very slightly and very slowly. Don't do anything yet. Turn your face a little to your right. A little bit more. Hold it. Okay. Now a little bit more to your right. Hold it. Tilt the top of your head a little to your right. More. Good. Down on your chin a little. Okay, hold it like that a minute. Well, that looks terrific. I'm not going to go to a lot of, you can relax a minute. I'm not going to go to great lengths to see every possibility of the pose because Raymond looks very interesting in this pose and lighting. I'm going to start the demonstration, and I'm going to start by drawing. I'm going to draw with this color, which is raw sienna with a little black in it. I always begin the drawing with a value that is slightly darker than the surface I'm working on, never lighter than. Be that in pastel or in oil, I start with something that's just a little bit darker than either the paper or pastel surface or the canvas. And this will be a little darker. I'm also going to use, let's see, this bristle brush. This is a number 4 filbert. And I'm going to dilute my paint slightly with the turpentine and stand oil. Then I'm going to wipe a little paint off the brush so that the first mark that I make will be have a stain-like consistency. And I'm going to draw the head in this dry, stain-like consistency of paint. Then I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to my paint to make it a little bit darker. I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush, and I'm going to dilute the paint a little bit more with the medium of stand oil and turpentine. The second drawing that I make will show up more than the first drawing because it will be darker, thinner, sharper, more liquid, and more accurate than the first marks I made. If I make a third drawing, which is very probable, I may switch to a smaller brush. I'll darken the paint still further with more burnt umber. I'll liquefy the paint more with the turpentine and stand oil so that the third mark will stand out more than the first two because it will be darker. It'll be thinner, sharper, more liquid, and hopefully more accurate. So I'm going to, in effect, start with a broom and end with a needle. I'm going to start with semi-dry paint and end with more liquid paint. Now, the ingredients of drawing that I am interested in for painting portraits are, first and most important, the distances of a length of my model's face. And I have a method for doing that. I use as my point of reference the expectation that from the top of the forehead, the beginning of the hairline, to the top of the eyebrows, and from the top of the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose, and from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin might be equal thirds of length. And those distances are, again, the highest place on the forehead where the hairline begins to the top of the eyebrows, the top of the eyebrows to the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. I expect those three lengths to be equal thirds. Then I look at the model. And I look at those three lengths, and I ask myself, in comparing one to the other, are they equal thirds? Sometimes they are. Much of the time, they are not. And when they are not, I ask myself, in what way do they differ? Which of those segments are longer? Which of those segments are shorter? Now, I'm going to look at Raymond for the first time from the point of view of these relative thirds. Since there is no hairline, I'm going to go to the top of the head, down to the top of the eyebrows as one distance. A little to your left, Raymond. Good, a little more. Down in your chin a little. Good. Okay, from the highest place on his forehead to the top of his eyebrows, especially the right eyebrow, when compared to the top of the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose, as I see it, from the top of his head to the top of his eyebrow is just a little bit, not much, just a little bit taller, longer. That is the space from the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose. In other words, if I take the bottom of his nose, the top of his head, divide it in half, the highest place on his eyebrow is almost in the middle, not quite. If I look at the distance from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin and compare that to the bottom of the nose to the top of the eyebrow, those two distances seem to me to be about the same. Raymond's face is very close to being equal thirds. It's just from the top of the head to the eyebrow, it's a little bit taller. After establishing those relative lengths, I then indicate the fullness of the eyebrow if an individual has a full eyebrow, as does Raymond. Then I come down beneath the eyebrow the appropriate length till I get to the beginning of the eyelid, the opening of the eyelid, the opening of the eye. I do the same thing on the other side, just distances of length. The thickness of the eyebrow, the distance to the top of the eyelid, the opening of the eyelid, the opening of the eye. Then I take the space from the bottom of the nose to the upper lip. In this case, there is a mustache, so I'm going to, which actually makes it a little easier, I'll indicate what the lengths of the mustache are. Then the fullness of the upper lip till one gets to the center line of the mouth. Then the relative fullness of the lower lip in comparison to the upper lip. The lower lip on Raymond is a touch fuller than the upper lip. Then there is a short distance of shadow under the lower lip till I get down to the chin, and I should then be left with the correct length on the chin. If I'm not, alarms go off, and I double check distances of length. This has nothing to do with anything other than distances of length. After establishing the distances of length, I'm then going to begin the width by drawing the nose. There's usually one side of the nose one can see more clearly than the other. Often it's where the shadow and light on the nose meet. In any event, I'm going to draw the nose. And in drawing the nose, I'm going to pay special attention to correctly judging the width at the base of the nose in relation to the length of the nose. If you make the base of the nose too narrow, the nose will look too long. And if you make the base of the nose too wide, the nose will look too short. I'm also going to draw and shade in any shadows that may be on the nose or cast by the nose. And starting with the shadows on the nose, I'm going to employ two more areas of observation. One will be, I'm going to begin to pay a tremendous amount of observation on matching angles. I consider the ability to be able to see and match angles immensely important in being able to draw anything you ever draw accurately. So I'm going to pay a lot of attention to matching angles, slants. I'm also going to begin using plumb lines to make sure that I have things aligned. All of this is going to be done very rapidly, and I'm going to put a number of lines in motion and then emphasize those that are most accurate. That's what I'm going to start with now. Okay. Down on your chin a little. Good. Tilt the top of your head a little to your right. Good. Turn your face a little to your left. Hold it like that. Tilt your head a little bit more to the right, the top to the right. Good. Hold it like that. All right, I'm standing at a considerable distance deliberately because from a distance, one can more easily see the proportions, the masses, and the values. When you are close to the model, you can more easily see the detail and the color. As I look at the lengths from the top of the head to the top of the eyebrow, seems to me to be about the same as the top of the eyebrow to the bottom of the nose. The bottom of the nose to the chin seems to be another third. Okay. I'm going to do this, you can relax, Raymond, do this life size. I usually leave at least the length of an individual's forehead from the top of the canvas to the top of the head. However, if you make someone high on your canvas, they will look tall no matter what their height is. And conversely, if you put them low on the canvas, they're going to look short, no matter how tall they are. So in this case, I'm going to have most of the head above center. Raymond is looking to the left. The light is coming from the left. Consequently, I want him in the middle of my canvas from left to right, or slightly to the right of center. Now, what I'm doing at this point is taking the widest place on Raymond's face on the left, the widest place on his head on the right, and I'm dividing that width in half. There is underneath his mouth on the right-hand side a shadow directly under the end of his eye. That's in the middle from left to right. Therefore, if I put the light that is on his left cheek in the center of my canvas, or slightly to the right of center, he will then be a little bit to the right of center. So I'm just trying to figure out how to place this. Another way one could do it would be to simply take soft charcoal and very quickly make a gesture drawing to get the size and placement. But I'm figuring it out without the drawing. Down on your chin a little. Turn your head a little to the left. Good. Tilt your head a little to the right, the top of it. Good. Down on your chin a little. Okay. Just like that. Touch to your left. Okay, good. Span of my own hand, or if you take the span of your own hand, if you spread your hand out from your thumb to your middle finger should fit from the bottom of your chin to where your hairline hopefully still is. And that will give you a quick gauge as to what your own face's life size is. You can do a head any size you want, but it's a good idea to know what life size is. So this is going to be about life size. What I have indicated already are approximately the top of the head, the top of the eyebrow, the bottom of the nose, the bottom of the chin. And I'm now going to begin drawing a bit more carefully. Indicating the fullness of the eyebrow, the distance downward till I get to the beginning of the eyelid, the opening of the eyelid, the opening of the eye. Now I'm doing two things at the moment, judging the distances downward from the eyebrow to Raymond's right eye, but I'm also comparing it to the eye on the right to make sure I'm getting the proper angle or slant. Now the distance downward to the upper lip. It's usually a good idea to check the center line of the mouth upward to the bottom of the nose as well. This is the distance to the lower lip, the length of shadow, and I am left with about the right amount on the chin. Now I'm going to begin the drawing of the width. I'm going to start with a drawing of the nose. In this case, I see the outline of the light rather clearly. And now I'm going to begin to use a plumb line. I'm holding a plumb line up to the bridge of his nose and looking straight down. And from my position, there is a nostril on the left which ends precisely over or under the bridge of the nose. The nostril goes through or ends right at this section. There's a little structure in the middle of his nose and the left-hand border of that structure, right in here, is even with the bridge of the nose when I use a plumb line. Ray has a rather wide bridge to the nose. And we'll put in a little bit of the subtleties that I see there. And I would make my first judgment as to the width of the nose. Now I'm going to begin to move over to the right. I have the length and the width of the nose indicated. Now I'm holding up a straight line, a plumb line, to the corner of the left eye, and from my position it is exactly even with the side of the nose. I have the side of the nose. I'm going to go straight up, make a mark. That tells me where the corner of his eye occurs. There's a width to the corner of the eye, a certain distance to the beginning of the iris, width of the iris, and the remaining width and the other side is easier to do in that the eye and iris are right up against the bridge of the nose. However, as I draw the left-hand side of the iris, I want to check and see where it is in relation to the width of the nose. From my position, fortunately, the end of the iris is exactly even with the tip of the nose. And that's precisely where I have it, so I know that's in the right place. Then there is a short distance to the end of the eye. There's a slightly steeper angle to the eyebrow. Okay, now, The middle of his mouth is this far to the right of the bridge of the nose. The end of the mustache goes right through the middle of his eye. Well, there's something I was just going to quickly jot down, but can be done more accurately. There's an area of tone on his mustache that ends exactly even with the nose. The place where the upper and lower lip change directions on my left. So right through here. The corner of the mouth almost even with the tip of the nose, not quite. Indicate the mustache. Mustache is even with the end of the eye. So here is the mustache. His eyebrow changes direction a little to the right of the end of the eye. That's where I have it. I'm just using the bridge of the nose and the portion of the eye that I've already drawn as a gauge for the width of the eye socket. However, I see something that I almost misjudged. Right here, from my position, there's a change of direction, and that change of direction is perfectly vertical. And that's a spot that's easy to miss. There's a section down on your chin a little bit. Good, good, fine. The shadow on the chin, exactly even with the bridge of the nose. The end of the chin at its widest goes through this section of the nose, so it's not too difficult then to draw this outline. There's a change of direction on this shadow, this far from the cast shadow. Now I'm going to put in everything I see or even imagine that I see in order to keep double checking these distances and spaces. one can also use horizontal plumb lines. And in order to determine where this shadow right up here on his cheek changes direction, I'm using a horizontal plumb line, goes through this section of his nose. In order to determine where the ear is, I'm holding a horizontal plumb line up to the top of the ear, and from my position it is even with this portion of the upper portion of the eyelid. The earlobe goes through this section of the mustache. So I know not only where the ear is in relation to what I've drawn on the left, but I know its size. The only thing I don't know is where it is left and right. The sideburns on the hair, even with the top of the nostril. The neck begins right under the end of the nostril. I'm going to start toning some of this in so that I can a bit more clearly see the width and pattern of the shadow on this side of the head. The place where the hair changes direction is right in here. Make my first judgment as to the placement of the ear, but I'm not going to do all the detail on the ear because I'm not certain that I have it in the right place. I'm also going to use the end of my canvas as a point of reference. This is a straight line, and it will make it a little easier to see the angles on the back of the head. The collar in the back at its highest is right here. Well, you can rest a moment. Raymond is posing perfectly. Usually, before doing the hair, I give my model a rest because there's no point doing the hair and then having their hair change during the break, but I don't have that problem this time. That's the last time I'm going to be sarcastic. So we'll take a 5-minute break. Okay. I'm just going to continue for a few more minutes on the drawing. I haven't yet completed the head. Okay, that's fine, just like that. Now, the collar over here is from my position a little above the chin, so it's in the right place. The collar in terms of its length, I'm comparing it to the length of the shadow cast by his jaw and the negative space from the little to your left, Ray. Good, that's fine. There's a portion of his neck that's in light, and it goes through this section of his nose. I see some structure on the nose that I overlooked. in terms of the length to the shoulder, I'm just looking at the negative space from the jaw down to the beginning of the shoulder, but I also have these other divisions in between. The width of his arm on my right is even with the back of the ear. Actually, that completes the first drawing. I'm now going to draw this another time, much more quickly, with a little darker color and a smaller brush. So I'm adding some burnt umber to my paint. It's still not straight burnt umber. And there are a few things I want to identify a little bit more carefully. Number one, the back of the head needs to be in a little bit. A little to your left. Good. Okay. Fraction to your right. Good. Perfect. You can relax a minute. That's enough of the drawing. Normally, if I had unlimited time, I might draw this one more time. One of the other things that I normally do, and certainly recommend doing, is when you are working, especially at this early stage, check your work in a mirror. Look at it in reverse. And looking at your picture in reverse often enables you to see mistakes that you get used to seeing otherwise. Now, I have a large mirror, 30 by 40 inches, on an easel, about 10 feet over in that area. And I constantly look at the work in reverse in the mirror. Now, in addition to being able to more easily pick out mistakes that you see in the mirror doubles the distance at which you see the picture. If the mirror is 10 feet away, your image within the mirror appears to be 20 feet away. So you have an opportunity to see what your painting looks like from a distance without having to walk away. I also have a hand mirror. I've neglected to bring it with me tonight. And normally I close one of my eyes, hold the hand mirror right up here, and I can get both the model and my painting and the model in the mirror at the same time. And that way you can check back and forth. In any event, what I'm going to do now is begin to paint. And the procedure that I follow, be it in pastel or in oil, whether it's a portrait, a still life, or a figure painting, any other subject, is to work from a dark to middle tone to light. I work from dark to light. And I work on the darks first. And I take the darks as a separate problem. And beginning with the darks, I try to determine, looking at the model, where is the deepest dark that the model presents, and I paint that first. Then I try to find the order of the darks. What is next darkest? I try to find the deepest dark, and then those darks that are slightly lighter. I try to find the order of the darks. I do those that are darker before I do those that are lighter. Now, this is the first step in what is an immensely important part of representational painting, seeing and matching values. And with me, it starts with the darks. Now, while working on the darks, apropos of that, let me just show you the darks that I'm talking about. That's fine. As I look at Raymond, the deepest dark is his hair, so I'm going to paint that first. The next deepest dark seems to be either the nostril or the shadow on his sweater. The mustache is dark, but not as dark as the nostril. There's a shadow on his eyebrow that's dark, not quite as dark as the nostril. The shadow on his jaw is dark, even a little bit darker than the mustache, comparable in value to the nostril. The shadow on the side of the face is dark, not as dark as the hair, not as dark as the mustache, not as dark as the nostril, not as dark as the sweater. You can relax. So I already know something about the order of the darks. They are not all the same. Simultaneously, while working on the darks are also done in masses. Now, masses are large, simplified areas that you can see more easily when you squint your eyes. When you squint your eyes, you see less detail and more of a solid, large shape, which is called a mass. Additionally, I'm going to compare the value of the darks that I see on my model to the background behind him. And I ask myself with every stroke, is the area that I am looking at darker than the background? Is it the same as the background? Is it lighter than the background? So the background can be used as an important neutral foil against which to measure values. Now, additionally, while working on the darks, one does the darks in color. And I'm going to immediately try to determine where the darks are warm in color and where the darks are cool in color. Now, I can tell you in painting portraits, you will always find both warm and cool colors in the darks on everyone. Additionally, I'm going to do the values deliberately slightly lighter initially than they actually appear. And when I work on the lights, I'm going to deliberately do the lights slightly darker initially than they appear. And as I work out the many stages of the painting, I will progressively deepen the darks till eventually they're full strength, eventually lighten the lights till they, at the end of the picture, become full strength also. But I want to give myself a little room to expand darker on the darks, lighter on the lights. Another consideration is that the darks are going to be done in relatively thin paint. That doesn't mean that the paint has to be diluted, but it will not be put on in a thick fashion. Rather, the darks are going to be done in a level consistency of paint. When I get to the lights, I'm going to do the lights in a thicker consistency of paint. Now, there is one other thing one can think about if you wish. There are some artists who very carefully fill in their painting right up to the borders of the drawing lines. And their works would probably better be characterized as colored drawings rather than paintings. Some great artists work like that. Botticelli worked like that, Michelangelo worked like that, and there are others, where they fill in the paint right up to the edges of the drawing lines. But there is another way of doing it, which is to deliberately go beyond the borders of the drawing lines with your dark colors. And then with your lighter colors, you trim away, much like erasing that which has gone too far. That produces a more painterly approach where the paint connects. And that is the approach of painters like Rembrandt and Sargent and others whose works are more painterly. Now, I'm going to repeat quickly the things that I recommend thinking about while you're working on the darks. I would recommend painting the deepest dark first and trying to find the order of the darks. The darks are done in masses. The darks are compared in their degree of contrast to the background. The darks are done in warm colors and cool colors. The darks are done deliberately fractionally lighter than they actually appear. The darks are done in relatively thin paint. And if you want, you can stay within the borders of the drawing line or go beyond them. That's what I'm going to do at this point. Now, the deepest dark that I see is his hair. And though my palette is quite large, it isn't large enough. So I have brought another palette, a paper palette, and I'm going to mix some of the colors of the clothing and the hair as I need to on this paper palette. The manufacturers used to have a middle tone gray paper palette, but they're no longer producing it. And I very much would have preferred that. Now, apropos of the deepest dark. Down in your chin a little. Good. Tilt the top of your head a little to the right. Perfect. Good. Up on your chin a little bit. Good. Okay, I'm going to do the deepest darks first. His hair is practically black, but I'm not going to use straight black. I'm going to use raw umber and a little bit of black. I'm going to dilute the paint a bit and begin the painting of the hair. Now I'm coming back to check, to compare what I have put down, and what I've put down is going to give me the dark tone that he presents while still being a value that I will be able to make a little bit darker as I work on the picture. I see a hint of slightly browner tone back here. Now, this is not as dark as his hair is eventually going to go. And there's another factor that I want to mention too. And that is, as soon as I put the paint on, I'm immediately aware of what direction my strokes have to take so that I don't get reflection or glare. And I know from having set up lights like these that my strokes need to go from left to right in order to minimize the glare. If my strokes go from right to left, I get a lot of reflection. So that's one of the other considerations. Now, I don't see anything quite as dark, although the nostril does seem pretty similar. For the nostril, I'm using one of the, a little to your left, good. Using one of the alizarin crimson sap green mixtures. Tilt your top of your head a little to the right, perfect, good. I see a comparable value in this area of the corner of his mouth. There is a deep tone in the sweater. Now, I'm not following the exact shape that the cast shadow on his collar presents. I'm not carefully drawing the edges because later when I get to the lighter tones on the sweater, I can trim away that shape. Now, this could go a fraction darker. Okay, now I see the mustache. There's an interesting cool tone in this section of his chin. See some cooler color in here as well. Yes, it's one of the sap green colors. And in this area, there's a decidedly warm tone. And I see this structure at the nose, which I hadn't indicated before. Now I'm getting to a point on the preparation of the picture where there are a number of values that meet where one is next to another. When I put the nostril in, the nostril actually it isn't even dark enough. I'm going to darken it a little bit. The nostril is quite dark and it pops out, but I know the value of the nostril is correct on my picture. It is very dark. What I'm doing is now painting the shadows that are around the nostril. And when those shadows are in, the nostril won't have quite so much contrast. That is not the same as lightening the nostril so that it doesn't pop out. Now I've got one tone against another tone. And what I'm going to do is to squint my eyes a great deal when I look at the model, and then I'm going to paint what I see, and squint my eyes to look at my painting to see if the two values next to one another match. So I'm just putting in the darks on the nose. Now when I step back and squint my eyes, they're similar values. And I also have to go over fractionally to the left on the edge of the nostril. Okay. From this point on, it's really just a question of putting in all of the darks that I see. Your eyes are blue. Right? Blue, blue, gray.
Not the beautiful, the blue.
Okay. We're having a private discussion about the color of Ray's eyes. I always ask my models what color they think their eyes are, and, because sometimes we don't agree. And if we don't agree, I am perfectly willing to do one eye the color they think it is. Ray and I agree, his eyes are blue. Now, his eyes are, the top of his iris is covered by a cast shadow cast by his eyelid. So I'm going to mix the color of the eyes, the shaded part first, which is black and blue, and a little bit of white. And I'm just going to paint the shaded portion first. And now the lighter portion. Okay, now there are still some additional shadows that I want to indicate. I'm massing all of the ear in shadow, because when I squint my eyes and look at the light on the front of his face, the ear goes into shadow. So at the moment, everything that is uncovered canvas represents the light. Therefore, any place that is uncovered canvas represents a light. And then when I squint my eyes, there are places that should be in shadow, such as this area on his neck. So I simply have to cover it, because at the moment it's uncovered canvas and it represents a light. Now this is, you can relax a minute, Ray. This is a key area right here. Because here I have a number of values that meet. The color and the background, the color and the shadow on the neck, the shadow on the neck and the hair and the background, the neck and the background. If one can get that group of values right, it has everything to do with what happens in the light. So eventually, I'm going to make sure that I have this matched, one tone against another tone. Okay. A little to your left. Not so much. Good. Just tilt. That's fine. That's perfect. All right, now I have some lighter shadows to indicate, and then I'll get to the next stage of the picture. Now I'm mixing black and white and a little bit of yellow on my palette in a kind of string, because there's a lot of this kind of color in the portrait. And that's not a color that I had mixed. Black and white and yellow. Relax a minute. All right, I'm ready to put in the middle tones. I put in pretty much all the darks. The procedure that I normally follow, which is a little different tonight, is that I draw, then I put in the darks, and then I paint the background. And then I go back to the darks and adjust them in relation to the new background. Now, one other consideration, it's usually a good idea to lay in all the darks all over the entire picture. I'm concentrating just on the head. But normally, if I had unlimited time, I would work on the head and then put in all the darks on the clothes, then the background. Now, certainly it makes sense to keep the head a little bit more in advance of development than the rest of the picture. But nonetheless, you ought not to have a head completely finished before one does anything else on the rest of the figure. So normally it would be all the darks on the head and then the darks on the clothes, then the background, then the darks again. The next step in my scheme of things would be to paint the middle tone. Now, the light is coming from the left top, therefore everything is going to be modeled in this picture from shadow on the right to middle tone, immediately to the left of every shadow. And that is where you find the middle tone. And all of this is going to be modeled like a ball or a cylinder, from shadow to middle tone. There are no places over here where the light meets the shadow. There's a middle tone unfailingly next to all the shadows. Now, the middle tone is going to be done a little differently than was done the shadow. The middle tone is going to be done in warm colors and in cool colors and in a third category that I call ochre colors, colors that are somewhat gold. The middle tone is going to be done in straight paint. The paint will not be diluted. The middle tone is going to be done in slightly spaced strokes. Instead of doing it in masses, as was the shadow done, the middle tone will have a little bit more of a broken quality. I'm either going to match the degree of contrast of the middle tone against the shadow edge, or what is more likely, I will deliberately err on the side of the middle tone being a little darker. I don't want to make the middle tone too light, because I have to keep in mind that when I come back and deepen the darks, I will get more contrast to whatever was used for the middle tone. So the middle tone will either be right or a little darker. Now, as I look at Ray from the point of view of the color of the middle tone, it's easy to see all of the very cool color on his whiskers. It's also easier, because this is so cool, to see areas that are not so cool. This section on his cheek is quite warm. His mouth is obviously warm. I see cool colors and ochre colors on the bridge of the nose and the side of the nose. I see a little bit of warm color on the nose, some ochre color, quite a lot of gold colors on the forehead, gold colors up here. I see some cool colors and gold colors in the eye socket. And the more I study the model, the more I'll be able to discover what the distribution of warm, cool, and ochre colors are. Now, Ray has very strong coloring, and it's easier to see his coloring. But there are some models where the coloring is extremely subtle. And in class, we'll be getting into how one can analyze seeing color. But I'm going to follow what the model presents. I'm not making up colors or arbitrarily using colors that look like skin tones. I want to find out what the distribution on Ray's face is of cool colors, warm colors, ochre colors, and any other colors that I see. I'm going to start with the cool colors that I see right in here. Now, the value I used there was a little bit light, so I'm skipping, doing more, going on to some other areas that I see that are cool. And this may be a better value. It is. In this section, the transition from shadow to middle tone is very soft. The middle tone is quite deep. And that's what I'm basically matching. In some other places, it's a little bit more contrasting. I just made a mistake and covered an area of shadow that pushed it too far, so I'm just quickly going back and replacing that edge. There's a light shadow that I neglected to put in here. Now, I'm not making any attempt at this point to model or finish or blend any area. This is all strictly preparation. I almost have all the middle tones in, and in just a moment I'm going to begin the light. I'm going to put in a little bit of the color of the clothing. For that, I'm going to mix alizarin crimson and a little black and white and a little bit of yellow. I find that a very interesting combination. Black, white, alizarin crimson, and yellow. And with those combinations, there are an awful lot of directions of different colors that one can get. Okay, you can relax a minute. I'm about to start the lights, but I'll give everyone a break for about 5 minutes. The brush before I put it on. A little to your left. Good. Tilt the top of your head to the right a little bit, please. Just the top. More. Good. Down in your chin. That's okay. Up again. Fine. Fraction to your left on your chin. Good. Perfect. I haven't used any sable brushes up till this point, but I'm now going to use one for some detail around the eyes. There's a pink rim of light underneath the eye. That's what I'm putting in right now. You can relax a minute. Right, I've gone from the drawing to the darks, to the middle tones, to the lights. I'm now going to establish the highlights. The highlights will very likely jump out, but by putting them in, it will let me know how dark the base on which they sit may be, how dark the skin tone may be, and how much lighter the skin tone has to go so the highlights don't jump out. Now, I'm not going to necessarily follow exactly the right colors for the highlights the first time around. I just want to establish how bright they are. And after that, I'm going to start over again. And I'll get to that point in a moment. But this will be just the highlights. Well, prior to that, I want to close this up a little. A lot of the work from this point on, in addition to continuing to prepare colors, is to adjust values where things are too dark in some places, too light in other places. That's a prime consideration as were I to continue. Can relax a moment. I've gone from the drawing to the darks, to the middle tones, to the lights, to the highlights. I haven't done much on the clothes. I haven't done anything on the hair yet or the ear. I haven't prepared the background. But fundamentally, I've gone full sequence. I'm now going to start again. I'm going to start again by redrawing. Now, the reason I'm redrawing is that during the time when I'm in painting, some of the drawing has been covered, some things have changed, some things were incorrect, so I have to redraw. And I'm going to redraw in straight burnt umber in a dark color right over what I've done. Then I'm going to go back to the darks and deepen the darks and come closer to full strength. This is just a stage. This is the beginning stage. I'm going to deepen the dark so that they're closer to full strength, which will then free me to be able to work on exactly what happens at the edges of the darks with the middle tone, which will then lead to repainting the light. Now, if at any point in the development of your own work you feel that you're not making enough progress, I would strongly suggest that you stop, redraw, and go back to the darks. That will nearly always improve your painting. Now, there are some artists who draw conscientiously for hours at the beginning of their picture, then they start to finish it, and eventually conclude that they have found errors in their picture which they can't change because they've already begun to finish it. The way you find and correct errors is by redrawing every day. A good time to redraw is at the beginning of each day's sitting, when you're fresh, the model is fresh, and you have 3 hours ahead. I would recommend that you check your drawing and then go back to the darks. Now, hopefully there will occur a point where you feel that your drawing is as good as you can make it, and you don't want to undo your picture by redrawing in line. One then does any correcting of drawing in the colors that you're using, the colors of the background, the colors of the skin tone. But I'm not at that point yet, so I'm going to redraw and go back to the darks. Prior to that, however, I'm going to use the fan brush. During the time when I've been painting, I've been endeavoring to make my strokes go from left to right so I could see what I was doing without glare. But I couldn't make all the strokes go from left to right. There are some places, such as in here and on the length of the nose and over here, where the strokes just couldn't go from left to right. They had to go in opposition to the light. And they have glare and reflection, raised rims of paint. If I let the paint dry like that, the painting will always have reflection, regardless of what the lighting is like. So I'm going to take the fan brush and lightly angle the fan brush from left to right, which will knock down some of the strokes that are catching reflection and enable me to be able to see what I'm doing. This in no significant way harms the picture. This is only a stage. If something smears or interacts with its neighbor, it really doesn't matter because I plan on going over this many times. This, incidentally, is not a technique that is designed to be done in one sitting. You can certainly get something creditable in one sitting, but it's not designed to be finished in one shot. It's designed to be done as well as you can possibly do it over as many sittings as are needed. This is simply a process. And it incorporates at the moment some of the things that I think are important. Color, paint quality, drawing, values, angles, working from dark to middle tone to light. And now I'm going to repeat all of that after I redraw quickly. little, that's fine, up on your chin, good. A little to your left, fine, just right. Well, one of the things that I discovered while I was painting is that I've made the chin too long, because the shapes in here are a fraction too lengthy in his chin. So that's one of the things I'm going to reduce. As you paint, you can, and you make all these small map-like sections fit, they tell you where things are off. And I've just discovered something that will be corrected in the drawing. I had too much, far too much medium on my brush at that point. I'm also turning the brush so that I'm working with the edge of the brush, the thinner portion, which is why I keep twisting the brush. Down on your chin a little. Tilt the top of your head to the right. Good. Fine. Now, I haven't said anything yet about where to make things sharp, where to make things soft, and why. That's a consideration as one gets further into the painting, and that's all called aerial perspective. But at this point, I'm not greatly concerned with the sharpness or softness of edges. I see a little detail. It's very interesting around the nose that I want to quickly jot down. Actually, I see several. Okay, having redrawn, it's now a question of going back to the darks. And I'm going to deepen the darks so they're closer to full strength. Now the hair is considerably closer to the correct value, but I know that it still isn't as dark as it can go. So I'm still giving myself a little room, but it's much closer. Now, using the hair as, and actually I'm going to go a little darker on it, as a guide, now becomes a question of the darks on the sweater. And now the dark in the nostril, but prior to that I want to do a little bit of revision on the drawing of this section of the nose. Now, even though it is too early to do so, I'm going to do a little work on the eyes. The iris is a circle. The top of it is always covered by the eyelid. Sometimes the bottom of the circle is visible. Most of the time it's covered by that pink rim. But it is a circle. The pupil is a circle, and I'm going to put the pupil in the middle of the circle of the iris. I always use black for the pupil. It's in effect a hole. And I make sure that the pupil is exactly the same size in each eye and in the same place and the same degree of darkness. And then I'll be putting in the highlight. Now, even though it is too early to do so, I'm going to put highlight in the eye. And it's too early to do so because the paint is wet. And when the paint is wet, it's difficult to get a crisp white highlight on each eye, because the white paint will mix a little bit with the iris. Usually I wait till the end of the picture to do this, but I put in a highlight with white. And in this case, it touches both the pupil and the iris on the top left. And I make sure that each highlight is the same size, the same degree of whiteness, the same shape, and in the same place on each eye. If anything about either of the highlights is different, the eyes may have a different expression. So that sometimes requires doing this several times. Can you move? Now I have one in, so the trick will be to put in the second. Now I usually put in a reflected light on the bottom of the iris opposite from the highlight. In this case, that would be the bottom right of the local color of the eye. Now, after having deepened the darks on the hair, that has the effect of seeming to lighten all the other darks. And it would be a question now of going back and deepening all the other darks. There are a few places where my drawing lines are a bit too prominent and glaring. You can rest, Ray. That's about all we have time for. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.